All right, so when you're writing a conclusion, it's really important to include a couple key things, which we're going to go over here together so you can write your own as a result of doing your experiment. So my example here, you can see on my screen, I'm sticking with the which brand of battery lasts longest, Duracell or generic. And in my experiment, here's kind of what I did. I purchased 2 identical flashlights and I loaded each of them with a type of battery. So one had Duracell in it, the other one had the generic. I turned the flashlights on at the exact same moment and monitored them. I watched and waited to see which flashlight would lose power first. After 7 hours, the flashlight filled with generic batteries died. After 9 hours and 34 minutes, the flashlight filled with Duracell finally died. So that's just some like key information here. And I'm going to walk you through what my summary would look like, what my conclusion would look like. And it's really important that you pay attention to each of the different pieces. Make sure you have them in your summary, but then also make sure that this is obviously about your experiment and how it went. Okay, so when you're writing a summary or conclusion about your experiment, there's a couple key things. The first important thing is exactly what it sounds like. You should have a summary of the data, meaning you should include numbers, include the numbers or the information that you gathered. Step number 2 would be you actually need to analyze your data, meaning you need to come up with an answer, right? Like Duracell, I'm looking at this, Duracell lasted 9 hours and 34 minutes. The generic lasted 7. So basically, after looking at my data, the answer would be to my question, again, which one would last the longest, that Duracell would last the longest. So you actually need to answer your question, okay? Step number 3 would also be to talk about any errors that might have happened, okay? So here's what I mean. Maybe in my scenario that I was setting up the flashlights and everything, maybe a mistake I made was that I accidentally turned one flashlight on, like maybe I accidentally turned Duracell on a minute late. That could have been an error, okay? Or maybe I did not pay attention to all of my control variables. Maybe I did not keep the flashlights at the same temperature. That probably could have affected it, right? Really, it's basically an error is anything that happens in an experiment that could affect the results, okay? Make them so they're not necessarily the best numbers. So with that information, like those key 3 things, oh, sorry, I guess there is one more. You also need to accept or reject your hypothesis. So you need to say if you were right or if you were wrong in your original guess, okay? So going through here, I'm just going to start typing and kind of talking at the same time. Sorry if it's kind of a lag. What I would go through and what I'm thinking when I'm writing my experiment, okay? So I might start with the summary of the data. I would say, during my experiment, I placed 2 types of batteries, Duracell and generic, into the same type of flashlight. Each flashlight was then turned on at the exact same moment. Now, summary of my data. After monitoring each flashlight, the Duracell powered flashlight turned off at 9 hours and 34 minutes. Again, I'm stating my data. The generic flashlight turned off at 7 hours. Okay, so step number 1 done. Step number 2, analyze the data, actually like come up with an answer to my question. Clearly, Duracell lasted longer than generic powered flashlights. Step number 3, and actually, like in the flow of things in my brain, it makes sense to maybe do step number 4 first, since I kind of got out of order anyway. But accept or reject your hypothesis. So maybe at the beginning, I thought that, well, you must be paying more for Duracell, so it probably is going to last longer. I would say something along the lines of, I accept my hypothesis is accepted. The Duracell battery lasted 2 hours and 34 minutes longer than the generic. Okay. The final bit was the errors. Now, you might not have had any errors, and that's fine. You just need to point that out, okay? Or if you did make a mistake or your entire experiment went to like hell in a handbasket, that is okay. If you end up not being able to collect any numbers or data, that is okay. But this is where it's really important to explain any issues or mistakes that you had, okay? So you could say, my information may not be the most reliable. An error was made when turning on the flashlights. One flashlight was not turned on for, I don't know, that's a silly mistake, 30 minutes after the other, okay? So again, you're just pointing out what are some things that could have affected your results. It does not have to go in the order that I have, but it should include the same bits of information, which are these 4 things up here: summarizing your data, analyzing your data, coming up with an actual answer, accepting and rejecting your hypothesis, and then jumping back up to number 3, any errors that might have occurred.